When my brother was in middle school, he started getting obsessed with science, so my mom would take him, and a lot of times me, to the museum downtown. It was one of those hands-on science centers, full of interactive exhibits, levitating magnets, plasma globes, and machines that made your hair stand on end. My brother Ethan loved the section on electricity the most. He'd spend hours there, pressing buttons to send sparks flying or watching electrons dance in a cathode ray tube. I didn't really get the excitement, but I'd tag along, mostly because Mom bribed me with ice cream afterward. One exhibit, tucked in a dim corner, always creeped me out. It was this old, clunky machine labeled Electron Flow Simulator. It looked like something from a mad scientist's lab, with a tangle of exposed wires, a flickering green screen, and a big red button you were supposed to press to start the flow. The screen would show a stream of glowing dots, electrons supposedly, zipping through a virtual circuit. Ethan was obsessed with it. He'd press the button over and over, watching the dots speed up, slow down, or scatter chaotically if you cranked the voltage too high. "It's like they're alive," he'd say, his eyes wide with fascination. One Saturday, the museum was emptier than usual. It was a gray, rainy day, and the fluorescent lights inside flickered every so often, making the place feel eerie. Ethan dragged me to the Electron simulator, as always, but this time, something was different. The machine was already on when we got there, the screen glowing faintly, even though no one had touched it. The dots weren't moving in their usual orderly paths. Instead, they were swirling, clustering together in strange pulsing patterns, like a swarm of insects. I told Ethan we should leave it alone, but he just laughed and said, "It's probably just a glitch, watch this." He slammed the red button. The screen flared bright white, and a sharp electric buzz filled the air, loud enough to make my ears ring. I stumbled back, but Ethan stayed frozen, his hand still on the button. The dots on the screen weren't dots anymore. They were moving too fast, blurred into streaks of light that seemed to spill out of the screen, into the air around us. I swear I saw them, tiny sparks of green and blue, darting like fireflies, but angry and erratic. The buzzing grew louder, and the air felt charged, like right before a lightning strike. My hair stood on end, but not in the fun, static electricity way. This felt wrong, like the room itself was alive and furious. "Ethan, stop it," I shouted, but he didn't move. Instead, his eyes were locked on the screen, his mouth open, like he was in a trance. The sparks in the air started to converge, forming a shape, a jagged, shifting outline of something humanoid, but not human. It was made of those same glowing dots, thousands of them, buzzing and crackling, and it was growing bigger. I grabbed Ethan's arm and yanked him back just as the thing lunged forward, its hand brushing his shoulder. Ethan screamed, and the lights in the museum flickered out completely. When they came back on a second later, the machine was off, the screen dark, and the air felt normal again. But Ethan wasn't okay. He was shaking, his face pale, and on his shoulder, where that thing had touched him, there was a mark. A faint, glowing pattern of dots, like a circuit board burned into his skin. He wouldn't talk about it, not then, not ever. Mom thought he'd just gotten a shock from the machine, but I knew better. I'd seen those electrons, or whatever they were, move with purpose, with intent. Years later, Ethan became a physicist, specializing in quantum mechanics. He never mentioned the museum incident, but I noticed things. He'd flinch at static shocks, avoid old electronics, and sometimes, late at night, I'd catch him staring at his shoulder, where the mark had faded but never fully disappeared. Once, when I asked him about his work, he got this haunted look in his eyes and said, "Electrons aren't just particles, they're aware, and they don't like being controlled." I don't know if I believe that, but I do know this: I never went near that exhibit again. And when the museum mysteriously burned down a few years later, the fire starting in that dim corner, I couldn't help but wonder if the electrons had finally had enough. I played the trumpet in band in high school, and our band director, Mr. Derek, was big on competitions. So several Saturdays during the year, we'd take mini field trips to other schools to play against other bands. This one time, I swear one of the schools had an Electron as a mascot. It sounds ridiculous, right? A tiny particle, invisible to the naked eye, as a mascot? But hear me out, because what happened that day still haunts me. For starters, the school was out in the middle of nowhere, some rural district with a name I can't even remember. Their mascot wasn't a person in a costume like the usual tigers or eagles. Instead, it was this thing projected onto a massive screen behind their band during the competition. It looked like a glowing, pulsating orb surrounded by streaks of light that spun around it in erratic orbits, like a 3D model of an atom gone haywire. The announcer referred to it as Sparky the Electron, and the crowd went wild like it was the coolest thing they'd ever seen. I thought it was just a gimmick, some high-tech visual effect to psych us out. But there was also something unsettling about it, the way the lights seemed to flicker in a way that made my eyes hurt, and the way the air felt charged, like a storm was brewing indoors. Our band played first, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the screen was watching us. The glowing orb pulsed in time with our music, almost like it was syncing to the rhythm of my trumpet. I told myself it was just a trick, some programmed effect, but it felt too precise and too alive. When their band took the stage, things only got weirder. Their performance was electric, literally. Sparks flew from their instruments, tiny arcs of light that danced in the air, and the screen behind them went berserk. The Electron started splitting into dozens of smaller orbs, each one darting across the display like it was alive, feeding off the energy of the music. The crowd ate it up, but I felt sick. My trumpet felt hot in my hands, like it was buzzing with static, and I swear I saw a faint glow around the bell of it, like something was building up inside. After the competition, while we were packing up, I overheard one of their band kids talking to Mr. Derek. "It's not just a mascot," the kid said, his voice low, almost reverent. "It's real. We harnessed it." Mr. Derek laughed it off, but I saw the kid's face, and he wasn't joking. I wanted to ask more, but something stopped me, a prickling on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. That's when I noticed the lights in the gym flickering, not in a random way, but in a pattern, almost like Morse code. In the air, it smelled like ozone, sharp and metallic, the way it does after a lightning strike. On the bus ride home, I couldn't shake the unease. My trumpet case, sitting on the seat next to me, felt warm, and when I opened it to check, I nearly screamed. There, on the mouthpiece, was a faint glowing mark, a tiny, perfect circle with streaks orbiting it, just like the mascot on the screen. I wiped it off, thinking it was some kind of residue, but my fingers tingled where I touched it, and for the rest of the ride I kept feeling these little shocks, like static, but deeper. It was almost like something was crawling under my skin. That night, I had the worst dream of my life. I was back in that gym, but it was empty and dark, except for the screen, which was glowing brighter than ever. The Electron wasn't just an image anymore, it was real, a buzzing, crackling orb of light hovering in front of me. It spoke, not with words, but with a sound like 1,000 tiny screams, a chorus of static that somehow formed thoughts in my head. "You played for us," it said. "You fed us." I woke up drenched in sweat, my trumpet case open on the floor, even though I left it closed. The mouthpiece was glowing again, brighter this time, and the mark wouldn't wipe off, no matter how hard I tried. I quit band the next week. I couldn't touch the trumpet without feeling that buzz, without hearing that static scream in the back of my mind. I don't know what that school did, or how they harnessed an electron, or if it was even an electron at all. Maybe it was something else, something older, something that used the idea of science to hide what it really was. But I do know this, at the state competition a month later, that school didn't show up. Rumor was their gym had burned down, electrical fire, cause unknown. And sometimes, late at night when the lights flicker, I wonder if it's still out there, feeding on energy, looking for someone else to play for it. I took general chemistry my first semester of college, and as I wasn't the best student, I started having trouble almost immediately. For the longest time, I couldn't figure out how to calculate the number of valence electrons, and the first test was coming up fast. Desperate, I stayed late in the library, poring over textbooks, my notes a chaotic scrawl of half-understood concepts. That's when I found it, a tattered, unmarked book shoved behind a shelf, its pages yellowed and brittle. It wasn't a textbook, but rather a journal, filled with handwritten notes about electrons, their behavior, and something the author called the resonance void. The writer, a former professor named Dr. Elias Marrow, claimed that electrons weren't just particles or waves, but rather entities capable of awareness when observed under specific conditions. He described an experiment involving a high-energy electron microscope, a rare isotope of cesium, and a frequency modulator tuned to 7.83 Hz, the Schumann resonance, the Earth's electromagnetic heartbeat. According to Marrow, this setup could awaken electrons, forcing them to exist in a state of hyper-awareness, trapped between quantum states. He warned, in shaky handwriting, that such electrons could see the observer, and worse, they could remember. In hindsight, I should have closed the book and walked away, but I was failing chemistry, and the idea of understanding electrons on a deeper level felt like a lifeline. The journal included detailed instructions, and, as luck would have it, my university's physics lab had the exact equipment mentioned, a relic from a defunct research program. That night, I snuck into the lab, my heart pounding as I set up the experiment. I told myself I was just curious, and that I'd run the test, take some notes, and leave. But deep down, I knew I was crossing a line. The microscope hummed to life, the cesium sample glowing faintly under the beam. I adjusted the frequency modulator to 7.83 Hz, and the room filled with a low, pulsating hum. On the monitor, the electron cloud of the cesium atoms came into view, a blurry dance of probability. But then, something changed. The cloud sharpened, impossibly, into distinct points of light, each electron frozen in place as if staring back at me through the screen. My stomach dropped. This wasn't right. Electrons don't behave like that. They're not supposed to just stop. A sharp electric jolt shot through my hand, and the lights in the lab flickered. The monitor glitched, displaying a single, magnified electron, its edges unnaturally crisp, almost pulsating. Then, text appeared on the screen, typed out in jagged, uneven letters. "You see us." I yanked the power cord, but the screen stayed on, the words burning into my retinas. The hum grew louder, vibrating through my bones, and I swear I felt something cold brush against my neck, like a static charge with intent. I fled the lab, leaving everything behind, but the sensation followed me. That night, in my dorm, the lights buzzed erratically, and my laptop powered on by itself, displaying the same message, "You see us." Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those frozen electrons, their light searing into my mind. By morning, my phone was dead, its battery drained in minutes, and my skin prickled with static every time I touched metal. Days passed, and the phenomena escalated. My dorm room became a hotspot of inexplicable electrical activity, lights exploding, outlets sparking, and once a voice, distorted and metallic, whispering from my unplugged radio, "We remember." I tried to tell my professor, but he dismissed it as stress, suggesting I drop the class. I wanted to, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't about chemistry anymore. It was personal. I returned to the library, desperate for answers, and dug through old faculty records. Dr. Elias Marrow had been real, a brilliant quantum physicist who vanished in the 1980s after a lab accident. His last known experiment involved electron resonance, and the official report claimed a power surge destroyed his equipment. But a janitor's statement, buried in the file, mentioned finding scorch marks in the shape of words on the lab walls, and words that read, "They see me." I knew then that I'd awakened something, not just in the lab, but in the very fabric of reality. Electrons, Marrow wrote, exist in every atom, everywhere, your body, your phone, the air itself. Once the journal used the Japanese kanji for awaken, they could move, communicate, and manipulate energy across vast distances, and they hated being seen. Now, weeks later, I'm writing this from a motel room, far from campus, hoping distance will help. But it hasn't. My phone battery dies in seconds, my skin is covered in faint, fractal burns, and every night the darkness hums with that same 7.83 Hz pulse. Last night, I woke to find my laptop open, the screen filled with a live feed of my own sleeping face, captured from an impossible angle above my bed. Below the image, in jagged text, "We remember you." I don't know how to stop them, or if I even can. Electrons are everywhere, in everything, and now they know me. They see me, and they remember. Back in 5th grade, we had to do skits to help learn about science topics. Me and my 3 friends chose parts of an atom, since we thought that would be easiest, and I ended up pretending to be an electron. I remember zipping around the nucleus, played by my friend Jake in a lumpy gray sweatshirt, waving my arms to show how electrons buzz in their orbits. It was all fun and games back then, just silly costumes and giggling through our lines. But now, years later, I can't help but wonder if that skit somehow marked me. If it woke something up, something that shouldn't have been disturbed. It started small, after I moved into my new apartment last month. I noticed the lights flickering, but not in the usual way old wiring flickers. It was rhythmic, almost deliberate, like Morse code tapping out a message I couldn't decipher. I'd turn on my laptop and it would glitch, random bursts of static on the screen, even though it was brand new. At first I chalked it up to bad luck, like maybe a power surge, but then the dream started. In the dreams, I was an electron again, but not the cartoonish version from our skit. Instead, I was an actual particle, a buzzing, frantic thing trapped in a vast, incomprehensible lattice of energy. I could feel others like me, other electrons, but they weren't just particles either. They were aware. They whispered in a language that wasn't sound, a language of charge and spin, and they knew my name. You played us, they hissed, their voices cackling like a broken radio. You mocked us, now you'll see what we really are. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, the room humming with a low electric buzz that faded the moment I turned on the light. But the real terror came last week when I found the first mark. It was on my arm, a faint red pattern like a circuit board etched into my skin. It wasn't a rash or a burn, it was too precise, too deliberate. Every night the pattern grew, spreading up my arm, down my chest, glowing faintly in the dark like a neon sign. And every time I looked at it, I'd hear that buzzing again, louder and angrier, as if the electrons in my own body were rebelling, trying to escape their orbits. Yesterday I woke up to find my apartment changed. The walls were covered in faint glowing lines, like the ones on my skin, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. My phone wouldn't turn on, but the screen flickered with static, and in the noise I swear I saw faces, distorted, angry faces made of sparks and shadows. I tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge, the lock sparking under my touch as if the electricity itself was holding me in. I'm writing this now on a scrap of paper because my laptop screen is just a storm of static and the buzzing is deafening. The marks on my body are almost complete, a full circuit now, and I can feel them, moving inside me. I don't know if I'm still human, or if I'm becoming something else, something they want me to be. The electrons, the ones I pretended to be all those years ago, they're not just particles. They're alive, aware, and they remember. They've been waiting for someone to notice, someone to play their game. If you're reading this, don't make the same mistake I did. Don't pretend to be something you don't understand. Because they're watching, they're listening, and they're everywhere.